Did you ever wonder what this jar of erasers and a pond full of fish have in common? Probably not a question you've asked yourself before. But the answer is we can determine how many erasers are in this jar, as well as how many fish might be stocked into a fish pond using volumetric displacement or mass enumeration. That is, sampling by weight to determine how many erasers are in the jar. Managing a successful farm involves a lot of different skills. In operations with livestock, keeping an accurate inventory is critical. When you're working with cows or sheep or pigs, it's pretty straightforward. You can walk around or drive around and count them individually. But what if you're working with fish? Fish farmers can produce millions of fish. And once they leave the hatchery and go into the pond, it's very difficult to keep track of the inventory. And that's because you can't see them. So it's sort of like putting these critters into a black box. So farmers use a couple of sampling techniques to help assist in this process. Two of the techniques are mass enumeration, or sampling by weight, or volumetric displacement, looking at how much water an individual animal or groups of animals will displace. These sample numbers can then be applied to the entire population. This works best with objects that are similar in size, but hopefully if you've got a number of fish that are just being hatched in your hatchery, the sizes are going to be very similar from an individual cohort. Because you probably don't have a whole lot of fish hanging around in your classroom to measure, in our example, we'll use these erasers like you might find at a party store, but you could also use gumballs or pea gravel or something along those lines. In order to capture the student's attention, you might take this jar and pass it around, let them feel it, weigh it, get a closer look, so that they might be able to take a guess. Pass around a piece of paper and have them write down their guess. Then ask them if there might be a more scientific way to get a better estimation. What if they knew the total weight of the jar, or the total volume? Would that help? What if I told you that the total weight of the hearts in this jar was 15.6% of the total weight, or 7.7% of the volume? Would that help? Let's see if we can figure it out. Here are our group of different shaped erasers. We've got 4 shapes. We've got fish, we've got stars, we've got hearts, and we've got circles. Let's take some samples and see if we can determine the individual weights of these different shapes, and then we can use the additional information on our worksheet to see if we can get a better estimate of how many erasers are in the jar altogether. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to turn on our scale and make sure that it reads 0. If it doesn't read 0, you need to push the tare button or the 0 on this scale. So first, we're going to measure the weight of 10 fish. The weight of 10 fish is 11.7 grams. So we're going to write that down. 11.7 grams. And then we're going to divide that by 10 to get the average weight of each fish. So that would be 1.17. And then we know that 31% of the total weight in the jar is made up of fish. So let's look at the total weight of the jar, which is going to be the full weight minus the empty weight to give us just the eraser part. And then we're going to multiply the weight of the erasers times 31%. So if we know the weight of the full jar is 1.647 kilograms, how many grams is that? How many grams are in a kilogram? Well, it's 1,000. So if we multiply 1.647 times 1,000, that tells us that there are 1,647 grams in the total weight of the jar. The weight of the empty jar is 110.8 grams. So that tells us that the weight of just the erasers in the jar is 1,536.2 grams. And if we know that 31.1% of the weight inside the jar is made up of the fish shape, we can determine the total weight of fish in the jar. So we would multiply that times 0.311, and that tells us that the total weight of fish in the jar is 477.75 grams. And now if we know that each fish weighs an average of 1.17 grams, how do you suppose we figure out how many fish there are in the jar? Well, we'll take the total weight of that shape and divide it by 1.17. Divided by 1.17 equals 408. And it actually says 408.3, but I'm pretty sure we didn't chop any of those fish in half when we put them into the jar. So you're either going to have to say 408 or 409. We'll stick with 408 for now. And then you're going to repeat this process with each of the different shapes. So next we'll do stars. And the weight of the stars is 8.2 grams. The weight, and we just use 10 because that's a simple number to work with. The weight of the hearts is 11.3. The weight of the circles is 15.6 grams. So now that you have this data to work with, this can be your experimental data set. Determine the total weight or the average weight of each individual, the total weight of each shape that's in the jar, and then the number of that shape that's in the jar to see if you get the total weight or the total number of erasers in the jar. And then compare that to your original guess and see which student comes the closest. You guys are all working with the same data set, but if you had a classroom full of students, I'm pretty sure that they would come up with different answers depending on the sensitivity of the scale or even how they make the calculations. The other option that you have in sampling is volumetric displacement. In that scenario, we'll take a graduated cylinder that's 100 milliliters, and for our use today, we're going to fill it up to 40 milliliters. And you want to make sure that the meniscus, the bottom of the meniscus or the curved surface of the water, you want to make sure that the bottom of the meniscus is even with the 40 milliliter line. And then we'll take 10 of our fish shapes and plop them into the water and see how much it raises the level. And then we'll complete the same operation with the other shapes and see how much the water level rises. And that is the volumetric displacement of 10 of each shape of eraser. We're going to start with 40 milliliters for each one. And in our case, the fish raised the water level to 49 milliliters. The stars raised it 47.5 milliliters. The hearts raised it to 48 milliliters, and the circles to 51.2. So since we started with 40 milliliters for each of these, you can subtract the beginning volume from the end volume to get the change in volume. So that's going to be 8 milliliters for the hearts, 7.5 for the stars, 9 milliliters for the fish, and 11.2 for the circles. So to determine the volume of each individual eraser, you would divide the change in the volume divided by 10 because we used 10 erasers. So 8 divided by 10 is 0.8. And from the information that we gave you, we know that the jar will hold 2.16 liters or 2,160 milliliters. So 2,160. We know that the hearts make up 7.7% of the volume. So that's going to be times 0.077. That tells us that the hearts take up 166.32 milliliters out of that 2.16 liters. So to calculate the number of that particular shape, we will divide 166.32 by the volume of each individual heart, divided by 0.8 equals 207. And in this case, it's 207.9, so we'll round up and say that there are 208. So complete that process for the rest of the shapes that we have and see what kind of total number you get for the erasers in the jar. And then see if that worked out about the same as the weight. You guys are working with the same data set, but if you had a classroom full of students, you can imagine that they might get some different readings depending on how level they are when they take the readings, the actual individual erasers that they get, or even how they do the calculations in the math. This is also a good jumping off point to ask the students how you might get a more accurate count. What if you took larger samples? What if you used more individuals? What if you used a smaller graduated cylinder so you could get a more accurate reading? Would those things help? That's a valuable discussion to have with your students. But for now, make your calculations and we'll see you tomorrow to reveal the answer. Thanks and have a great day.